So, thank you so much, everyone, for being here with us today for our trauma writing class. This is my first official trauma writing class, but when I was looking at my story, I have been realizing that I do use writing as a healing tool. And so, we are learning better emotional regulation through this tool, and I'm super excited to learn. Marianne and I have only been friends for a little bit. I think I came across her because we both shared on another platform, the collective healing. And when I saw her share, what she was sharing resonated with me. It was things that I needed to hear. So I've been enjoying just watching her stories every day. And I'm like, we should do a class together. So here we are. So with that, I'm going to go on mute. If everyone that is not sharing could also go on mute, and I'm going to turn it over to Marianne.
Thank you, guys. Okay, so I'm just going to share my screen because I have a slide. Okay, give me a thumbs up. Can everyone see that? You guys can see it? Okay, awesome. So welcome to your first trauma writing class. Today we're going to learn how to regulate our emotions. So I am Marianne Samrath. I am a trauma writing coach. And this is a little bit of my backstory. I used to work in fashion for 7 years. I was a handbag designer. I worked at Tory Burch, Marc Jacobs, Coach, most recently at Tommy Hilfiger. So I was doing that for about 7 years, had a lot of trauma experiences within the fashion industry. During the past 3 years being at Tommy Hilfiger, which was a very healthy work environment for me, and a 9-to-5 job, I became a writer within that space and time of being able to have a hobby outside of work. I became a writer. And within the past year, from 2019 to 2020, before the pandemic, I wrote over 100 published pieces on Medium, Thought Catalog. I went to poetry open mics, so I would be designing handbags at work, and afterwards, not telling anyone, I'd go to poetry open mics around New York City, talking about my breakup. And I eventually left Tommy Hilfiger last year, almost a year, actually about a year ago, and became a trauma writer full time. And within that process, I did a lot of things as a writer. I was a trauma ghostwriter, writing for life coaches and therapists. I became a TikTok influencer, grew up to 15,000 within 3 months, telling my story about healing from abuse. And within that story, I created, within that experience being a TikTok influencer and reaching almost 1 million people with my story, I decided to create a podcast called Mental Breakthrough. And that is my memoir podcast of my healing journey. So trigger warning, I will give a summary of my story. Just trigger warning, there's going to be emotional abuse, narcissistic abuse, and sexual assault. So if you guys need to turn off your mics or leave the room, go ahead and do it. So in April 19, 2019, I publicly condemned my perpetrator for sexually assaulting me on Instagram. And before then, I was writing the experiences of the reality of my relationship for over 1.5 years. And what had happened was that the person that sexually assaulted me was my partner's best friend. And when I told him what happened, he victim blamed me, victim shamed me, manipulated, and gaslighted me back into silence for over 1.5 years. And no one knew this was happening because being Asian, having this cultural upbringing of sweeping things under the rug and wanting to fix everything myself, that's what I tried to do in that 1.5 years that I eventually left him. I tried to fix it in my reality, but then my shadow work was writing. I learned the tool of writing from my therapist. I was starting therapy in 2018, and she recommended I journal on my iPhone, or your Android, whatever phone you have. So I started writing on my iPhone, and I wrote every single day, multiple times a day, the reality of my experience, what no one knew what was going on, and eventually turned into poetry. And I started publishing these poems every single day, multiple times a day, while I was at work, while I was designing bags. I was writing a poem, publishing it on an Instagram account called Sincerely Miss Mary, which is my brand name. Sincerely Miss Mary used to be an anonymous Instagram account for over a year and a half, me live documenting the emotional abuse of my experience. But the way I was writing was from a place where I was standing up for myself. So I was being really raw, unfiltered, and basically who I am today. So I wrote into the becoming of the person I am today, which is a mental health advocate and a trauma writing coach, and someone that I also guide people into writing their stories as well to reclaim their power. Oops. So what is trauma writing? And why am I a trauma writing coach? I healed through my experience of writing from all the trauma I was experiencing, from my emotionally abusive relationship to that catastrophic breakup to healing generational trauma. And within my journey of trauma writing, which is basically, it's an exploration of the emotional truth of your experience. So you're writing from a place of honesty. When you have hard moments in your life, we often suppress it because that's what we're programmed to do. That's what society teaches us, that when we have a tough moment to, sweep it under the rug and not feel our feelings. And that just doesn't work. It just does not work. We're allowed to feel the way we need to feel when bad things happen to us, when we're rejected, when we're betrayed, when we're being abused. We're allowed to feel the necessary emotions that come with that. And so that's why I coined this term trauma writing. And this is why I guide people to write the emotional truth of their experiences. So a lot of the time people come to me and they're scared to write their stories. And I always tell them that the writing process is for you. You always write for yourself first. And that's what we're going to do today. So this is how writing can heal us. So within the process of creating my memoir podcast, Mental Breakthrough, I was meeting trauma-informed psychotherapists, life coaches, ancestral healers through the creation of my podcast, coincidentally. And they helped me connect the dots as to how I healed from writing. So all of these people that I'm connected with are my friends, and they taught me, they helped me connect the dots as to how the heck I healed from writing. So my friend Heidi Landis, she's a licensed creative arts therapist. She said that trauma is transformed when you can thank the roles you once played that helped you survive and allow it to retire so you can create space to become the author of your story. So when you're writing a trauma story, what you're doing is you're validating the emotional truth of your past self. And within that process, you stop the shame cycle, because a lot of time if we're going through a hard time or we've had trauma in our lives, we shame it. We shame that past version of ourselves. We don't want to think about them. We hate them. And the thing is like that past version of ourselves needs the most love. We would not be who we are today if we weren't that past version of ourselves. So it's giving that person, that past version of ourselves, a lot of freaking love, compassion, and forgiveness to retire that person, because we don't hate them. We don't kill them off. They're still part of us. They're still part of us. And we need to retire them, forgive them, and just thank them for doing the best they can with what they knew, so we can become the person who we are now, letting go of the past and truly just believe that we are the author of our story. We are always in control. So my friend Stephanie Vendito, she's a life coach. She's also one of my co-leads for my group coaching program. She said to me, in the darkness, we find our gifts. And this is in one of my first meetings with Stephanie. We both worked at the same fashion place that caused us a lot of trauma. And she said that to me, and it really just made me feel less alone in my experiences. What this means, Stephanie is also like ancestral and trauma informed, is that in the darkness, we are not alone. We are always being guided back into the light. And the darkness is actually, if you think about it, rock bottom is a place where you rise. That is all you can do when you're at rock bottom. You just rise. And that is where we find ourselves. That is where we return to ourselves. That's when we say to ourselves, like, I'm not going to tolerate this anymore. I'm not going to do this anymore. I'm not going to let people walk all over me anymore. So in the darkness, we find our gifts. And for me, that was writing. That was where I discovered writing to guide me back into the light and return to myself. So how many of you guys have had mental breakdowns? How many of you guys cry? Just type in the chat if you have had a mental breakdown. Actually can't see the chat, but all right, here it is. Yep. Yep. So a breakdown is the healthiest thing you can do. Let me say that again. A breakdown is the healthiest thing you can do. What causes a breakdown is when you suppress all of your emotions and it builds up because energy can't be created or destroyed, just transferred, and you project it out. And breakdowns is the healthiest thing you can do because that is your threshold of what you will no longer tolerate. This is a moment of advocacy, and it's not pretty. It is ugly. I've had moments, I have a lot of mental breakdowns, and I cry and I, sit in the bathroom floor and just like, I'm angry, and all of those things are okay. We're allowed to have breakdowns because that is our body and our mind's way of saying, like, I don't want to tolerate this anymore. It's our mind and body's way of telling us what we need to move towards to nourish ourselves. So a breakdown is the healthiest thing you can do. We do not shame that part of ourselves, because if we were to shame the moments in our lives where we had breakdowns, we wouldn't be who we are today. A breakdown is it's just an emotional explosion of letting you know what you need in your life. So I love this psychology fact. When a person has a reaction to something in their environment, there's a 90-second chemical process that happens. Any remaining emotional response is just the person choosing to stay in that emotional loop. So our mind and body can actually regulate our emotion in 90 seconds if we just lean into that emotion. So whether it's rage, anger, sadness, if we just like sit in that for 90 seconds, it'll actually pass and we'll feel better. So I have this quote over here. This was one of my first poems that I wrote when I was anonymous. I was a victim by holding my truth. At last, I reached salvation by releasing it. So even when we're feeling our emotions, we're letting ourselves sit with those uncomfortable emotions. It's us being honest with ourselves. It's us being honest with ourselves. And we're not taught to do that. We're not taught that anger is okay. Be angry for 90 seconds. We're taught, oh, if you're angry, like, don't be angry, like be positive. Like, no, like you are allowed to feel what you need to feel with whatever you are going through. And it is a release. There is literally like a 90-second chemical reaction going in your body to regulate that regulate your emotion. So feeling our feelings is always valid, and it's just our emotional truth coming up. So you are always allowed to feel your feelings. So now we are going to feel our feelings. So everyone take out their phones, and in 1 minute, I just want you to write a list of all the times you felt alone, misunderstood, disrespected, or invisible. So I'm just gonna play some music for you guys. You guys hear that music? Oh yeah. Write a list of the times you felt alone, misunderstood, disrespected, or invisible. Here. All right. Do you guys want to put in, you want to share, put in how that was for you, or if you want to share one thing in the chat? I felt alone at the start of COVID, makes me tear up. Getting silent treatment, yeah. Anyone else want to share? Have had a couple close friends stop being friends. Oh yeah, I've had friend breakups the past year. Yeah, people need to talk about that more. Growing up with narcissistic parents that damaged me and my brothers. Yeah. I feel most alone when I can't even figure out what I'm feeling, let alone explain to someone who's emotionally distant. Yeah, it's finding the right people that validate your emotions is important. I feel disrespected all the time. My mom's reaction to my trauma from a family member. Oh my gosh, I'm sorry for your loss. I felt invisible in my childhood when my parents didn't explain to me what was going on with them or what it meant to have a divorce. I felt alone because I didn't feel like I had a space to share my feelings. Thank you, everyone, for sharing and being so vulnerable with writing all of your emotional truths. That is you validating yourself. That is you creating awareness of the experiences you went through from a place of vulnerability, which means it's a place of truth. That is you validating yourself. And that is one of the first steps of healing, is accepting the things that happen and feeling the way you need to feel. It's okay to feel angry about these things happening or lonely about these things happening. But I want you guys to remember that emotions are information. It is not your truth. It does not mean if you feel invisible, it does not mean you don't matter. You absolutely matter. If you feel disrespected, it does not mean that you're not meant to be disrespected. It means that you deserve respect. Emotional truths of how you feel is to validate your emotions, but you are allowed to feel all of those things. Just to read more minute. Yeah, so thank you guys so much for being vulnerable. And yeah, there's no right way to feel. No one can say, yeah, honestly, you are always allowed to feel the way you feel. There is no right way to feel it. There's no wrong way to feel it. You just feel it. And why we need to feel our feelings is because that is us validating ourselves. And emotions is feeling emotions is information to what nourishes us. So when you feel angry at someone, that's teaching you boundaries. If you're feeling sad, that means maybe you need to lean into someone. It's all teaching you how you need to show up to the world, to a place where you feel nourished. This is what regulating our emotions is. This is what happens when we validate ourselves. It's learning about us and our needs and our emotions and who we need to surround ourselves with. And it's okay to move towards people, places where we are celebrated, and move away from people who make us feel invisible and lonely and misunderstood and disrespected. Learning what our emotions are telling us, it's really just setting boundaries for ourselves and teaching us that it's okay to love ourselves. These are what we need to feel the most us in the world. To be able to feel like ourselves, we need to surround ourselves with people, place, and things that make us feel visible, heard, and validated. So feeling our feelings, regardless of how ugly it is, it's teaching us what we need. So we're going to do another writing exercise. I'll just type it in the chat. So if you guys can just put in the chat what emotion you hate the most or you're most uncomfortable with. Shame is a huge one. Yeah. Frustration. Impatience. I suppress anything not happy usually, but probably shame the most. Shame, loneliness, rage, feeling inadequate, anger, and impatience. Okay. So what we're going to do now, you guys can keep typing in the chat what your most uncomfortable emotion is. I'm going to put the prompt in there. So what I want you guys to do is lean into all of these uncomfortable emotions for the next minute. And so I want you to write a thank you letter to the emotion you hate the most for protecting you. So I'll give you guys 1 minute. Okay, does anyone want to share how that experience was for you guys? Put in the chat how you feel. How was it? Which emotion you wrote a letter to? Tearful. I had trouble finding the words. That's okay. Thank you, Rach, for protecting me by helping me understand when my boundaries have been stepped over and teaching me how to get in touch with what my boundaries are to begin with. Beautiful. Definitely tearful. Yeah. So when we feel these emotions, anger, sadness, rage, it's from a place of feeling unsafe. That's why these emotions arise. That's why we get angry or sad or we feel lonely. We feel unsafe. So these emotions that come up, it's a place of wanting to protect us. And leaning into that is very, very important. We're allowed to lean into those emotions long enough to explore what it is we need. And so that these two exercises is regulating our emotion. It's learning how to reframe these uncomfortable emotions as actually protecting us. We don't need to suppress what is trying to protect us. When we suppress these uncomfortable emotions, it builds up to an explosive state where you have a breakdown. And what we want to do is just regulate our emotions as we live our lives. And it's just a part of being human. We can't avoid uncomfortable emotions because we learn from it. We learn about ourselves. We learn about what we need to feel safe in this world. And that's one of our most basic human desires, is to feel safe, to feel seen, to feel heard, to feel validated. And all of those things are valid. So I hope you guys carry these exercises with you everywhere you go. You have your iPhone. If you're ever feeling uncomfortable, take out your iPhone and write about it. Write about it for 90 seconds and you'll feel better. So I hope you guys enjoyed trauma writing and you carry these tools with you. And I just want to thank you so much for giving me the space to teach you guys. I'll pass the mic to you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Can you drop in the chat how people can get in touch with you if they would choose to
Yeah.
follow you or have information about a more long-term writing class that
Yeah.
you have?
So
And
I'll
then if does anyone have any questions or anything they want to drop in the chat before we move to our next section?
So I'll put my course coming up. It starts next week. I have 9 spots left. It's a 6-week trauma writing group coaching class where I teach you more of like this, and it's more in depth. And there will be co-leads. So a lot of my friends that are trauma informed life coaches and therapists will be a part of it. So if you guys want to be a part of it, I invite you to apply if this work resonates you and you want to dive in more deep.
Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, this is a quick reminder for me because I don't just pull out my phone and journal for 90 seconds in order to regulate myself. So I really enjoyed this. So, with that, I'm going to move into my section where I am going to share with you guys my trauma recovery journey, which I'm currently still in the middle of, as well as how I realized that a lot of times writing was a way that I used to heal, as well as other modalities that I use as a holistic wellness and self development coach. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. So, for those of you who may not have met me before, I'm Tashina Gonzalez. I am a Michigander, proud Michigander. I am an extremely gregarious, extroverted person. I am a certified holistic wellness coach, self development coach, poet, and currently an automotive professional as well. And one thing I just want to remember, I heard this, everyone to remember, I heard this quote recently. from Gabor Mate. Children don't get traumatized because they get hurt. Children get traumatized because they are alone with the hurt. So it's not a contest. We don't want to compare when people are sharing their stories, but we want to make sure that we're creating supportive groups and systems for individuals, because that's what some of us didn't have when we were younger. And that's the reason why we're living and trying to recover from trauma. So it doesn't matter if you haven't experienced some of the things that you hear other people. Some people don't even realize that they've experienced trauma because they think, well, I never experienced rape, or I wasn't abused in this way. The problem really isn't how big the trauma is, but if you didn't get the support. And so that's why we're creating these spaces now, so that individuals can receive the support that they need. So for me, my childhood trauma included big T trauma as far as sexual abuse, physical abuse, and emotional abuse, as well as little T trauma, such as some medical issues, just general neglect, emotional neglect at certain points in time. There's a questionnaire if there's anyone that is questioning whether or not they've experienced trauma, because they're like, I don't know, but I seem to have these issues sometimes. If anyone would like that, I'll give you my email address afterwards. And you can take the questionnaire, and then maybe it'll clear some things up for you. But I score a 45 out of 60 in this particular questionnaire when it comes to the trauma that I experienced. So this created my personality, which is overachiever, straight A student, workaholic, tomboy, cool, calm, and collected. I was the person who the world could fall apart, there could be a storm, and I would be the one who would always stay cool, calm, and collected. And throughout my childhood, I did actually write poetry from the time I was about 5 to 16, 17 years old. I kept a journal my entire childhood, documenting things that would happen in my life. And I actually won a couple of poetry contests. And then I grew up. And so my first stage of trauma recovery, I actually initially blocked out my entire childhood. So my first breakdown that I had was around 19, and it came to me in the form of flashbacks. And so I started to actually have flashbacks of my childhood. I began to cope with it in extremely unhealthy ways. I pretty much drank every weekend to try to escape those flashbacks. At one point in time, my parents came to me and they said, we don't know what's wrong with you, but there's something wrong with you. And so then I was in therapy. I had to be on Paxil to deal with the anxiety and the depression I was going through. When I was in therapy, I did more journaling. I did some workbooks. And then I eventually because I don't have any biological condition, meaning I wasn't diagnosed with bipolar or some chemical thing, I was able to come off my medication. And that was the first time that I started using natural things to support me. So I started using herbs like St. John's wort and kava kava. Obviously, I'm not a doctor, and I would never suggest anyone to come off their medication. This was sanctioned by my therapist at the time, because again, it was what was needed to regulate me at the time, but I didn't have a chemical thing that I needed to adjust. So I was able to come off my medication after about a year and a half. So that was my first level of trauma recovery. Another quote that I heard just recently, and I posted on my social media pages today: trauma comes back as a reaction, not a memory. So in stage 2 and stage 3 of my trauma recovery, it actually has not been flashbacks for me. It's actually been reactions to things that were happening around me. So a lot of the triggers or the inputs that created my trauma recovery stage 2 was being in an unbalanced marriage where I took most of the financial responsibility and suffered a lot of emotional abuse and threats of violence. I didn't really have any direct physical abuse, but things were broken in the house, or there was a time where he beat someone else up in road rage or things of that nature. I also, from 2012 to 2014, suffered through multiple chronic illnesses while still taking all of the financial responsibility of my household. I was in a stressful work situation. At one point in time, I could be working up to 80 hours a week. in a 7-day period in my automotive job. And so some of the things that I did during that time was journaling, workbooks, and I worked on just developing contentment with my situation. I had fallen into a deep depression for a while, and it was manifesting in just negative behavior towards other people. And that's when, again, I got into more alternative therapy. So started using essential oils and learning different techniques and different supplements and getting back into herbs and things of that nature in order to support myself through that stage of recovery. And then that lasted all the way until probably 2016, 17, once my divorce was final. And then trauma recovery stage 3. So this is the stage that I'm currently in. And so this stage of my trauma recovery started with COVID. As I mentioned before, I am an extreme extrovert. And so COVID actually hit me very hard, more than I would have thought that it would have. And that's something just to remember for everyone here. Like almost everyone probably has experienced some type of trauma just because of COVID, because either you experienced some type of extreme loneliness or you actually got COVID and that was a medical condition that caused some trauma. So even if you think you didn't have any trauma before now, almost all of us have experienced trauma during this time. And again, this manifested for me in lots of negative reactions. Prior to that, I had 2 brothers who were having some issues, and so I was supporting them. And so when COVID hit and we were in our houses, it was the first time, honestly, from when I had gotten divorced, that I was alone with my thoughts. I also was laid off. I was still getting paid, but I was not coming to work or showing up for work in for an 8-week period. And so I had less on my plate. I had no distractions and I was alone with my thoughts. And so I was fighting with people on Facebook and message boards that were stating things like, why can't you guys just stay home? I was having allergic reactions to masks. I was home alone. And so that put me in a state of like between languishing and depression for a while. And then when COVID continued, because I was alone with my thoughts, I started processing emotions and things with my divorce that I had never processed before. And then that led to bringing up just certain memories of my childhood. And so I started actively working on my trauma again, probably within the last 6 months through different books. One of the books that I went through was What Happened to You. And then my most recent breakdown I had Memorial Day weekend when I was out of town with some friends, and I had an unhealthy dynamic with a couple of them. One was male, one was female. And again, the trauma that appeared in that time for me was my reactions to what was happening to me. So I could not regulate myself, had very negative reactions to certain things, and ended with a crying fit in the middle of the street after an explosion, after a disagreement. So in this stage of my trauma recovery, some of the things that I'm doing is I actually, during COVID, probably for the first time in I don't know how many years, started writing poetry again. So far, my goal is to actually do like an actual poetry book within the next year. So I don't try to force the poetry, but when something comes to me, I'm up to I did find a couple poems I wrote when I was younger, but I think I'm up to 20 poems right now. So my goal is to get up to 55. So that has been very healing. I definitely have started journaling again. The aroma freedom technique, which is a very specific technique that can be used with aromatherapy in order to reprogram memories and change your emotions, has been the single most important thing in helping me with emotional regulations. And then havening is a technique that is a touch therapy technique with some visualization that has been very helpful as well for me in regulating my emotions. And I just actually put together an online course where I talk about the pause method, which helps you go from stress to success. And it incorporates some of these things that I'm mentioning, like posing, alternative techniques, using a mentor. And then when it comes to goal setting and moving forward, what I do in my coaching practice is I use strength finders. So that's what those letters stand for. So that is my trauma recovery story and where I am right now. And again, if anyone is interested in the course that I have, it's actually in beta testing right now till the end of the month, meaning you can do it for free. It'll be a little bit different when it actually launches. It'll have some add-ons, but if anyone's interested in going through that, it'll give you more detail and a lot of the things that I do in order to do my trauma recovery, reduce stress, and move towards success. So for those that are not connected with me that are here for the first time, you can find me on IG and Snapchat at Sweet Canela 5. There's a 5 there. I forgot to put the 5 there. I do weekly lives, Feel Good Fridays, in both English and Spanish. Sometimes they're related to emotional growth or trauma healing. It's usually just whatever I'm going through. Sometimes it has to do with pre-diabetes or something that actually is physical as a holistic wellness coach. But you can follow me there in order to see, and I post Motivation Mondays, things of that nature. And then if you're interested in any information as far as the getting information for the course or the questionnaire that I mentioned, that is my email address that you can send me an email to and just put what you're interested in the subject line, and I'll send it to you. You could just put I'd like the questionnaire or info on the course or whatever. Just put that in the subject line and I will get it to you. So that is my portion and what I wanted to share with you guys. With that, I will see if there's any other questions, any comments anyone would like to make before we close out today. Candace?
I'd just like to say that this was very interesting from both of you. I learned a lot. And I can't believe how quick and effective the journaling on the phone is. Very nice to just have it with you, just pick it up, start doing that. And really the part about thanking your feelings, it's very effective and it's very valid because those feelings did push me to different levels that I wouldn't have expected.
And I put it up in the chat, but now thinking back, I remember like after we would have an incident at home, and I'm like full of emotions and, I wasn't allowed to express them either. So, we're going to do this to you and you can't feel any certain way. So I would like write a letter and then I would, as soon as I was satisfied with what I wrote, I would tear it up out of fear. So I was like, oh, okay, so that must have worked then. And because I don't even know why I did it. Yeah. It's because I had no one to tell. But I'm like, okay, I was onto something. I didn't even know it.
Yeah,
but thank
that's
you.
So awesome.
So that means, yes, as an adult, we can make it work as well.
Yeah. And I will say that was you regulating your emotion as a child, and the fact that you were able to do that without any guidance is incredible too. And also to any of you guys that have a dream to be a writer, save all of your journaling, because some of those can go into your poetry. Some of that can go into a chapter of your book. Save all of it. I know a woman who started writing Post-it notes that turned into a memoir. So save all of your writing.
Absolutely. Any other comments before we close out? Oh, all right. Thank you again, Marianne. Thank you everyone for being here, sharing in the chat, being vulnerable. And the replay will be available in the actual Facebook group. Feel free to share it. I mean, we do this all the time. We're always on our IGs because we want everyone to have these tools that are quick and easy and can give you a fix. So yeah, definitely share with anyone that was missing that might need this information. And everyone have an amazing evening. Bye, guys.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks so much.
Bye.
Bye.